everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our February Supply Chain Lunch and Learn. This month's session will feature David Hetherington of Books International as our speaker, moderated as usual by the wonderful Ken Brooks of Amplify. This comes out of BISG's Supply Chain Committee, where we bring conversations together to talk about issues in the industry affecting the book industry supply chain across all segments. David, if you'd like to kick things off, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, folks, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you. I think obviously the recent events has made this conversation all that much more important. And I would encourage you as we go along to put your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond accordingly. So just to sort of set the tone for today's conversation, right? First of all, today's discussion is about practicalities. This is not about politics, right? This is perhaps one of the most unique events in my long career. The only thing that even comes remotely close to this is COVID, and hopefully what we're going to be talking about today will not last anywhere as long as that did. But again, it's something that I would encourage you. There's a lot of really concerning issues today, and let's get into them. Next slide, please. Okay, so a quotation from former President Obama: "Sticking your head in the sand might make you feel safer, but it's not going to protect you from the coming storm." I think it's pretty clear that we have a storm on the horizon, in one form or another. And the key word here is preparation, not reaction. And that'll be one of the themes we talk about today, right? Being proactive, not reacting. The sooner you accept the fact that the supply chain situation is likely to change in some fashion and degree, and begin your preparations, the better your organization will be prepared to weather the storm. It's about understanding that regardless of one's politics, we're in the midst of unprecedented volatility and with very limited predictability, I think, and it behooves all of us, whether we are large or small publishers, large or small manufacturers, right, to pay close attention to the health of our supply chains. Next slide, please. So when you talk about crisis management, there are essentially two thoughts here about the types of crisis that one might deal with. One is a black swan event, which is a random, highly improbable event that have a dramatic, if not potentially catastrophic implications. The first one that comes to mind for a black swan event is certainly the COVID pandemic. The second one that comes to mind is actually the California wildfires. I don't think that anyone expected anything like the state of California experienced in recent weeks, but it was just something literally an off-the-charts experience. The second thing is a gray rhino event, which is something that's slowly emerging. It's an obvious threat, and one that we tend to ignore, perhaps underplay its possibilities. But I think, again, given the environment that we are operating in right now, with so many factors up for grabs, we really want to be mindful that things could change, and not necessarily for the better. All right. So regardless of whether the event is a black swan or a gray rhino, we want to be mindful that these events are real possibilities, consider the implications for our business, and prepare for those eventualities to the extent that we can. Let's think about some of the things that could happen in the coming weeks and months, right? We have an administration which has a very different view than the preceding administrations. And so one of the things that's a real possibility for the book business is an increase in the banned books, all right? Another thing that was just resurfaced yesterday was the possible elimination of the Department of Education. That clearly has implications for many of us on this call. A third thing that I've got on my list here is funding delays or elimination of support for certain types of programs, which could have a bearing on college enrollments. And a fourth concern that I have, at least, is library funding. Again, the new administration's policies are very different, and I think that there are clearly implications for public libraries, school libraries, and academic libraries. And I'm encouraging everyone on the call to think about how your business ties to these different threads and whether or not there's anything you need to do to ameliorate the risk. Next slide, please. So I'm a great fan of aphorisms, and this one I think is perhaps the most important, and a theme that I would ask you to take with you as the conversation proceeds. The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. So what I'm suggesting here is that this is a time when you want to be proactive, not reactive. The more attention you pay to the situation before it develops, the better your organization will be able to respond. What I'm encouraging all of us to do is to examine and acknowledge the range of risks to the status quo and to consider your options, right, if any, that you may have to mitigate them, right? Mitigation, this is a very important point. Mitigation efforts are likely to be more successful if you have a fully engaged organization and support from the C level, right? From your CEO, your COO, your CFO at minimum. And there are certain, I guess, analogies that I would use here. I think the situation we're in right now is if I would liken it to having a fire in your house and deciding that now's the time you're going to go to Home Depot and buy a fire extinguisher, right? Or being on an airplane and you have an emergency, and that's when you decide to read the safety card. You want to attend to these things in advance, not wait until the last minute when you're reacting rather than directing. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the types of risks that an organization faces? Generally, in supply chain, there are 10 categories. One is poor supplier performance. The other is a volatile global economy. I think that that's a real possibility in what we're talking about right now. There's a certain measure of geopolitical risk that we're dealing with, right? So if things heat up between the United States and Panama about the canal, that could present some issues. We have a complex regulatory environment. There may be demand planning complexity. There may be some reputational risk. I don't believe that that's an issue right now for us. A global labor shortage. I think that that is a real possibility, at least in the United States, if the immigration program really takes root. Natural disasters and climate risks. Clearly, after last week's events in California, that is absolutely a potential problem. Rising inflation and cyber risk. The point is, regardless of what risks your organization faces, a well-prepared organization has the possibility to recover quickly and under the right circumstances may even prosper, right? Again, the point here is to be proactive, not reactive. Evaluate your options before they're needed. Build capabilities now, even if it means lowering your margins. And the other thing to consider here is that investors reward organizations that pay attention to risk mitigation. You do not want to be the victim of it. You want to lead. You don't want to have to respond when it may be too late to consider your alternatives. Next slide. Okay, so what are some of the past and prospective risks, in practical terms, right? Some risks that have taken the black swan and gray rhino names on. Obviously, the announcements of the last couple of days about imports and exports have an impact, right? Funding cuts and policy changes by the Trump administration that I mentioned earlier. Regulatory compliance, right? The three acronyms that we are contending with now from the European Union, deforestation regulation, which has an implementation date of 12/25 for large organizations and 6/26 for small and medium organizations. GPSR, which is the General Product Safety Regulations, again for the European Union, and the European Accessibility Act, which goes into effect June of 2025. All of these things are going to have a bearing on our operations, and now is the time to get ahead of these. I think there are many folks on the call who will remember that at the end of 2024, there was absolute panic about EUDR, and one of while there was great relief from the delay of EUDR's implementation, people are still concerned about it, and it's a regular part of virtually every conversation I have in and around sustainability. Ukraine and the Middle East, I think we've seen some progress recently, but hopefully, and that will hopefully endure, but that could change. We all know the implications it had for the Red Sea, and the potential implications with the Panama Canal, and of course, that unfortunate episode in Baltimore, right? Major changes in the distribution landscape. We had in March of last year the bankruptcy of small press distribution. NBN, the Roman and Littlefield unit, that's decided they're going to exit that business and offer to move their customers to Simon and Schuster. Last week's announcement of Diamond Comics going into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The UK, two issues of particular note: Grantham, the Penguin Random House third-party distribution operation, exiting that field to focus on supporting their own operations in the UK and Europe, and the UID, United Independent Distributors, going into administration, causing a number of issues for a number of publishers in the UK. We have potential issues with print capacity. We have potential issues with paper prices. We have potential issues with labor shortages. There is a real possibility that with the tariffs being introduced, that we will have there'll be a reduction in the amount of paper that's brought in from Canada and overseas. There's a possibility there that will drive shortages and price increases, right? And again, you want to be prepared for that. Amazon policy changes, right? And our dependency risk on Amazon. I'm sure there are people on this call who will remember, I think it was the summer of 22 or 23, when Amazon essentially stopped buying books altogether. And there was, widespread anxiety throughout the book publishing industry. And finally, the risk of a new pandemic. Hopefully that won't materialize, but the discussion about bird flu is an ongoing news item. Next, please. Okay, so what is supply chain resilience? Supply chain resilience is the ability of a supply chain network to withstand disruption, minimize effects of upheaval on your organization's revenue, its costs, and its customers. So again, it's essentially protecting your organization against disruptions in the supply chain, right? Not only do resilient supply chains respond swiftly and effectively to radical economic, technology, and market changes, but they also can help an organization gain competitive advantage, right? If we look at supply chain management, right, one of the great, achievements of supply chain is Amazon. Regardless of how one feels about them, they have done a remarkably good job managing their supply chain, at least in my opinion. And I think that they set the standard by which other organizations are measured. Supply chain resilience is emerging as a competitive differentiator, right? But it requires a fundamental shift to collaboration from relationships that are transactional and often adversarial, right? So one of the things that I think we would all agree with, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next few minutes, is that in the publishing business, we tend to focus our attention, at least from the production and manufacturing, on the job that's in front of us. How can I get the best price? How can I get the best deal? That may, in fact, I understand the motivation for that, but that may, in fact, at this particular time, not work to your organization's advantage. I think this is a time where you want to cultivate, right, long-term relationships that are based on collaboration, not confrontation, relationships that are strategic and not transactional, and relationships that help you be successful. And success is not necessarily saving every penny that you possibly can if it means a strained relationship with a potential vendor. Next, please. All right, so what have we learned, right? That COVID has exposed significant weaknesses in the supply chain. That is an absolute given, right? That the challenges are daunting, but in my view and my experience, many of them are surmountable. Changes to traditional supply chain strategies, though, are urgently needed. I encourage you in the strongest possible terms to evaluate your supply chains and transition from transactional to strategic supply chain relationships. We want to build more resilient and responsive business models with a view to preparing for what we thought was impossible, right? And organizations that build long-term supply chain resilience and give it ongoing attention, right, are going to come out of a turbulent environment in much better shape than those who don't. And the other thing that, again, I want to emphasize is do not overlook the risks facing your supply chain partners. Spend time and effort, cultivate the relationships, and don't think that this has only to do with you. There's two sides to the relationship, and I encourage you to reach out and build some strong, ongoing relationships with your organizations. There are several companies that I would like to cite that I do business with on a regular basis. One is a company called Augsburg Fortress in Minneapolis. They are a superb supply chain partner. Princeton University Press is another one that comes to mind as someone I think you might want to emulate. Scholastic is also another organization that I think does a superb job managing their supply chain relationships. Next, please. Okay, so another thing, what have we learned? At a particular time like this, what I would encourage you to do is to focus attention on managing cash and fixed costs, right? Especially in an environment with a high degree of uncertainty, right? Organizations, you really want to aggressively reduce your fixed cost and shift to a model with volume-driven variable costs so that if the circumstances change to your detriment, you do not have to have a large fixed expense every month, right? Some strategies that you might consider, right, or to outsource your warehouse, right, while retaining your order to cash functions and associated customer relationships, right? Transition from an on-premise to cloud operations to reduce capital demands and strengthen security in a work from home environment. I don't think that we're ever going to go back to people coming into the office the way it was 10 years ago, despite whatever the philosophy is in the federal government. I would regularly revisit my inventory and manufacturing strategies, especially when you're facing uncertain demand. And of course, this will come as no surprise, permanently shrink your real estate. Again, the idea here being to reduce fixed costs and to top off your cash. Next, please. Next slide.
Apologies, my screen's frozen. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so one of the things that I'm really going to encourage you to do as you look at your supply chain is to stop this fixation. In fact, one might call it an obsession with unit manufacturing costs, right? And focus again on conserving cash and reducing the total cost of ownership. When I was growing up in the business many moons ago, the obsession was constantly on unit manufacturing cost. In fact, the phrase that we used to use was we called it nickel snatching, right? You know, we would make decisions based on very minor amounts of money that in the long term added time and cost and complication to a supply chain that really could use more efficiency than was available at the time. Another thing I would ask you to do is to increase your use of digital manufacturing to support situational inventory strategies. Digital supports three inventory models that offset does not. Print on demand, which is literally selling first, printing later. Automated stock replenishment, which allows an organization to print first, sell later, but with minimal stock risk. What you do in those particular situations is that the vendor has guidelines on an individual title basis that when inventory reaches a certain level, you automatically go back and replenish it. And then there's the traditional core, which is the model that says print first and keep your fingers crossed that you're going to sell them later. I think the concern I would have right now is with uncertainty, do you want to be overly optimistic about the prospects for your product? Another option you might consider here is to print and fill from the same location. Fulfilling from your printer eliminates freight in both time and cost, and clearly there are some sustainability benefits from it. And I think this is particularly critical as publishers build B2C capabilities to compete with Amazon and to develop high value direct relationships with your customers. Next slide. Another thing I'm going to encourage you to do, and if your organization has not done this, again, I think this is extremely important, is to build your own business to consumer capabilities, right? Really should receive attention from your organization. Publishers want to work to recover some of the margin and the relationships that they have given to Amazon. Why the attention on B2C? I said because Amazon has shifted focus from books to consumer goods as the pandemic accelerated. I think there's a certain amount of uncertainty in the future of bricks and mortars, not that they won't exist, but that the merchandise mix is going to change and will emphasize margin and turn. Non-book products are receiving more attention in bookstores. And if you visit any store, whether it's a chain or an independent, I think you'll find more of the shelf space occupied by things other than books, right? So you don't want to lose out on those sales, but you want to try to capture them by having a relationship with your readers and developing a community with them. All right. Gives you the opportunity to recover margin that you're now giving to channel partners through the discounts. And more importantly, I think, is that it builds long-term direct customer relationships and communities that add value to the firm. If you are in a firm that is possibility of being sold or some piece of it spun off, the value of the firm increases when you have communities, when you have direct customer relationships. When those relationships are with Amazon, the firm does not have the same inherent value. Next, please. Okay, so other issues and opportunities, all right. I would not underestimate the impact of the 2024 elections. And again, I want to say here that what I'm discussing has to do with practicalities, not the politics, all right? I want to consider the fact that with everything that's changing, one of the other things that may change are rising paper prices. There may be some impact on supply, reduced capacity, and mills shifting to more profitable lines. There are concerns about the importation of paper from Canada and from Europe. My suspicion is that that will, constrain the supply in the United States, and you want to be focusing on paper availability, less on cost. And my suggestion would be is that you buy the paper from the printer whenever possible, right? Reduced manufacturing capability as capabilities been taken offline through acquisitions and rationalized and privatization makes it felt. I think everyone knows here that there has been aggressive manufacturing consolidation in the last few years. In the time that I have been in the book business, 17 book manufacturers have either gone bankrupt or been acquired, and many of those acquired organizations have been essentially consolidated off the map. So my question for you is, are you paying attention to these risks and are you preparing accordingly? Next. Okay. So getting to our wrap-up situation, are you aware of the potential black swans and gray rhino risks that you face and preparing for problems rather than reacting to them? Are you anticipating what might go wrong and establishing contingency plans? Do you know your supply chain options? Are you securing your supply chain in advance, or will you need to scramble if and when things go wrong? And fourth point is your organization preparing for potential risks or considering them as isolated supply chain problems that are not receiving appropriate C-level attention. Right? One of the things that I think has changed in the past few years is that there's a place at the leadership table for supply chain executives, and I would encourage you to make sure that that happens. Encourage you that if you're in a production capacity or fulfillment capacity, that your leadership team knows what you're up to, knows your concerns, and that they're involved in the decision making about how you're going to respond. Next. Some final thoughts, right? You want to move quickly. These issues demand attention. The pandemic has proven beyond doubt that the unthinkable is possible, right? Again, I'm going to emphasize the point that managing the supply chain and operational risk requires C-level participation and support. These organizations need a coordinated approach, not a siloed responsibility. Everybody has a stake in this, right? Everybody has a role to play in the success of the operation. I would remind you that the longer your supply chain, the higher the risk. Shortening the chain reduces the risk, reduces your safety stock investment, and offers better customer service. I would encourage you to expand your supply chain knowledge. Webinars like this and LinkedIn are great sources of new ideas. I have to say that LinkedIn has a remarkable bounty of information around supply chain, very much worth your attention. I would also encourage you to participate or follow in trade organizations like Book Industry Study Group, the Book Manufacturers Institute, Protestant Church Publishers Association, Independent Book Publishers Association, and PubWest. All of these organizations understand the risk. All of these organizations are committed to making sure that their members are aware of the issues as they can be and aware of the potential solutions as they can be. Next. I want to thank you. It's 12:30. I want to thank you for your time and kind attention, and I would welcome any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. And one more. And here's my contact information. If you have any questions that you'd like to send to me directly, happy to speak with you. My email's there, my phone number's there. Please feel free to call or write. Let's connect on LinkedIn if you like, and I will be at London Book Fair. I will be at the PubWest annual meeting, IBPA meeting. I'm a road warrior, so I'm there if you'd like to chat. And with that, folks,
Yeah, thank you, David. Hey, just a bunch of questions come to mind as I listen to this. I've always heard of resilience as being able to maintain your key metrics like gross margin and inventory turns and revenue and things like that in the face of these kinds of shocks. In the channel, when I wrote that in there, I can't remember who made the comment, but is there any way to measure your resilience ahead of time? Well, first off, what do you think of that idea about defining resilience? And secondly, any way to measure it ahead of time?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the ways you could look at it is that one of the problems I think that we have in the book publishing industry is a lack of visible metrics, right? One thing I think that the Association of University Presses has done very well over the years is that they have a metric report that they prepare every year, which compares expense to sales ratios for organizations of different size. We don't have that. So I think the place to start is your own organization and your margin improvement concerns. And I think the other important thing here is to measure these metrics on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, if you will, rather than wait until the end of the quarter or the mid-year or the end of the year. By that time, it may be too late to do anything.
Any way to get ahead of it? Like, I don't know, months of coverage if you're forecasting, or any other kinds of
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Months coverage is not ideal way to look at things, but I also think that the important thing is to look at it as on a very granular level. What I've found over the course of my experience is that people tend to look at these ratios on a cumulative basis rather than look at the detail that makes them up. So, if you have a couple of lines that are selling very well, but then you have some others that are not doing quite so well, the lackluster performance may be obscured by the good performance. So you really want to break it down um, at the discipline level, I guess is the word I would use, so that you see where your concerns are and your improvement opportunities are. I mean, the one thing that the danger with a high level inventory analysis is that, again, that the successes obscure the failures. So you really want to categorize your inventory into A, B, C, and D, and to think about the implications, that this particular situation may have for you, right? If you have an organization where your product is on the banned book list, how is that potentially going to affect you? Uh, if that title is on more banned book lists. I saw some statistics the other day that were just staggering the number of titles. There's only about 1,100 books on the banned book list, but I think there were 10,000 episodes, where libraries or school systems, have banned the book. I think that there's a real possibility that that could increase.
one of the other things that's been like a constant debate over time is, do you single source, develop tight linkages with your supply chain partners, or do you multi-source to provide the resiliency in case there's an issue one way or another? And I know I've
The
gone
truth
back and
is that
forth on this.
I think that the truth is that it's somewhere in the middle, right? You may want to have a major and a secondary and perhaps a tertiary. But the other thing I would really encourage people to do is to look at your options before you need them, right? So everybody will recall during the height of the pandemic when there was a paper shortage, uh, we found out that we had friends that we never knew we had, right? We had people knocking at our door for manufacturing capacity, and we did the best to accommodate them. There were some that we couldn't. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you want to make these durable relationships. You don't want to make them expedient relationships. One of the other things we found is that some of the folks who came to us and we helped out, right, as soon as the supply chain situation loosened up a bit, they went right back to offshore, right? My suspicion is that some of them will come back, but that's something that you do not forget. The other thing is that I would really encourage you to look at your relationships. If you have contractual relationships as they're coming up for renewal, I would not wait for them to expire to look at them. I would encourage you to look at them before they expire, as a matter of course, right? Even if you're perfectly satisfied, I would not. I would encourage you not to accept the status quo, because you may learn something from someone else that really makes your operation more effective. That there may be someone else out there who could really enhance the quality of your supply chain operations. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't necessarily accept the status quo. Always keep your options open.
Well, okay, so I heard you say avoid title level sourcing, establish longer term relationships, but wouldn't you be uh, encouraging, like, I don't know, multiple RFPs or um, contracts with like three or four, what you said, two, three,
No,
four?
no, I think it's sort of a balance, right? So it's based on the scale of the operation. That's number one, right?
Yeah.
Based on what your anticipated need is going to be, right? And just striking a balance between the size of your operation and the size of your supply chain base. So it's somewhere in the middle. So again, when I started in the operation in publishing many years ago, right, we had two types of product. We had open territory product, right, which you put out for bid, which was typically a 2-color or 4-color textbook, right? And then you had your commodity black and white. The commodity black and white was on a contract. The larger runs, the more expensive investments, those titles went out for bid. So it's sort of doing something along those lines. In the book fulfillment business, right? Fulfillment sources are, I think, in some ways increasing, but in other ways shrinking. So there's only one independent book distributor left in the US of any scale, that's IPG, right? With NBN's decision to exit from the market, what you're left with are the third-party operations from Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Macmillan, Hachette, Norton has an operation. But again, there may be something in the middle where you go to a fulfillment house that specializes in pick, pack, ship, and you hold on to the customer service, you hold on to the sales, right? So again, evaluate the options, evaluate them before you need them.
Hey, you also mentioned develop those B2C relationships, which sounds like a good idea. Over the course of my career, I've done that, but I've also gotten a lot of pushback from senior executives that say, our customers buy from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, et cetera. We're never going to be able to pay for this. How does a smaller publisher implement B2C without breaking the bank?
I think that the cost of getting into B2C has gone down, right? With more and more publishers in that space. If anybody's interested in some names to do that, please contact me after this. I don't want to appear to be a commercial for anyone here, but there's a couple of providers who are very good at this. One of whom specializes in publisher B2C websites. They've got 350 websites built with some of the best names in the business, large and small. So I think it's very much more practical. And again, I would say that this idea of building a community, building loyalty, right? So for instance, in certain lines of business, like in the romance line, I think that, having a B2C capability is very strong. If you're in the kids books line, particular series, some of the stuff that Scholastic has, I think that there's the possibility there, that you can leverage those types of products to build a robust B2C business.
Let me ask folks that have been contributing in the chat. My chat is jumping around, so I keep losing my place. Any questions that anybody would like to come off of mute and ask?
Hi, David. It's Angela Engel. How are you?
Good, Angela.
So for some of us that don't have the ability, our titles are not POD friendly, nor make sense for us. I liked some of the ideas. I'm like thinking and spinning in my head, just pushing back on the returnable market. I have been much more aggressive in the non-returnable market. And I like that idea of like thinking about it. So I put a couple things in the chat. How realistic would it be for like a BISG to talk with American, like a bookshop and the ABA and really discuss like, hey, let's really think about this. Let's think about margin. Let's think about a deeper discount. And in this time, do a more of a non-returnable option. Do you think that's even an opportunity? Do you think we have a place that we could have a discussion that's more serious, given that some of us definitely print overseas or in Canada, and these tariffs are a concern?
Angela, with all due respect, I think I may have to play the New Jersey card here and take the fifth on this, right? And the person that I would direct the question to would be Brian O'Leary as the director of the BISG. I think that your question is certainly a reasonable one, but I think that again, it's not my area of specialty. I have my own thoughts. I do think, however, that bookshops are unlikely to trade to give up that cherished right of returns. But again, Brian, I would have to defer to you on this.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a a perspective on whether bookshops would, retail outlets or bookshop.org would participate, but I'd be happy to have the conversation. We're on good terms with Allison Hill, who runs ABA, and Andy Hunter. Andy Hunter was actually received an innovation award from us the year the bookshop started, so 2020. I think it's just it should be an arrow in the quiver, but maybe it's just we haven't had that conversation yet, so we'd be glad to take it up.
Brian, I really awesome. I mean, and know that we're coming with what David brought up, which is discount, right? Like creating, like we're not just saying, hey, become non-returnable, but like a real deep conversation of like what that would discount would look like, and given, also supply chain issues, right? Like if I think about some of my best-selling titles that are at the cash wrap that are gift and impulsy, and there's a special thing that you can't POD for these retailers, like it could be a win-win in so many ways in terms of also keeping the supply chain healthy.
Right. And there was an answer in the chat from somebody who is offering that, and perhaps an independent retailer who's already involved in that, and kind of giving the realistic answer that it doesn't necessarily sell fewer books, but it does result in smaller quantity orders and more frequent ordering. So we'd want to make sure that the systems are in place to be able to support that. So
Thank you.
okay. You also, Angela, while you're speaking, you mentioned something about Winter Institute and
Yeah.
an author that's talking about analytics. Maybe you could talk.
Yeah. So hi everyone. Hope to see some of you. I'm the publisher. I know David. I sit on a board at PubWest, and I will be there too. But I have an incredible author who actually specializes in Google Analytics and small and websites. And she will be speaking at ABA on Monday at Winter Institute in conversation with one of their largest suppliers who helps and hosts hundreds of direct-to-consumer websites for booksellers. And they're going to be in conversation talking to booksellers what they can do with Google Analytics and search words within their own website to help surface and create better opportunities, and what a website should look like, also like what the cart should look like. And so if you are a publisher, it will still apply to us. I sell B2C as well. And so it will still apply to us in so many ways as just small business owners. So I encourage you to come. It's at 2:30 on Monday in Denver at Winter Institute. And if you have any further questions, I can drop my email in the chat. And I will be with David also at PubWest next week in New Orleans. Thanks.
I'd like to also pitch the concept of supply chain transparency. We have, because we've got the multi-stage distribution, we're also susceptible to the bullwhip effect, so that as slight demand changes happen out in the out in the channels, that gets accelerated and whips back up the chain and really hits the people in the front end. We saw it with COVID. We also saw it when Amazon closed a distribution center. Demand didn't change, but man, did we get hit with a lot of returns. So that kind of visibility and working with channel partners on what they're seeing, I think, is a grand way to work. David, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things I would encourage everyone to do is to really develop relationships with the suppliers. And when I say relationships, I mean, spend time talking about your respective requirements. I'm not suggesting that you want to invite your suppliers for Thanksgiving dinner, but I am suggesting, that spending some time with them, visiting the plants that you work with is always a good idea. Visiting the plants where you might prospectively work is always a good idea. One of the things I find amazing about the publishing business is that you'll ask a customer if they'd like to come to visit the plant to meet the people they work with on a day-to-day basis, and these are relationships that might involve several hundreds or millions of dollars, and you're asking somebody to get on an airplane and spend one night in a hotel room, and they sometimes the reaction you get is this: you're asking them to mortgage their house. These are hugely important relationships. You need to develop, connection with people, and I can say that Ken and Brian can attest to this. I'm not making any claims to be Mother Teresa here, but I've learned over the years that you get a lot more if you have a working relationship with people than you have an adversarial relationship. So I'm sort of going to, as we wind up, 4 points I want to make. Practicalities, not politics. Collaboration, not confrontation. This is not a time for confrontation. Strategic relationships versus transactional relationships, and be proactive, not reactive. I think if you can do that, I think that the chances of us coming out of this successfully are dramatically increased.
Man, I wish you'd waited just like, I don't know, 10 minutes to do that great summary. It would have been perfect at the end of this.
Well, that's okay. I can do it again. As a matter of fact, I'd like to have T-shirts made up with that. So
That's it. Well, I think we could use that everywhere. And by the way, you're invited to Thanksgiving dinner next year.
Thank you.
So any other questions or comments?
There was a hand raised, Barrett.
Oh.
Maybe that's accidental, but if you have a question.
No, it's not. Hi, I'm Dave Barrett from TNF. It was really a question around service. As somebody who deals with a lot of digital print, there's always issue around consistent service across the full year, peaks and troughs. I was just wondering, what can publishers and printers do more, or to gain that consistent and improved service, particularly for POD across the period,
I think it's a matter of sort of projecting your volume and asking your providers to put placeholders in. I think, but part and parcel of that now will be the connection between the placeholder and paper supply, right? So I think we want to make sure that we balance that, right?
I agree. Everybody... I think there's there's volume and forecast can be shared, and we do share that sort of thing, but obviously it's not an exact science, particularly with print on demand, and particularly with some of the larger customers who might order in large amounts at any one time. And so it really is an open question in terms of, because I've got for many years I've seen this, the US in particular, hover around the kind of 5-day turnaround time for POD. And my challenge is to try and get that down to 3 days, which is more in line with what it is in the UK and Europe. And also more in line with what some of those other third-party channel wholesalers are able to achieve. And again, that's throughout the year, particularly at peak times. And it's a genuine open question, not at ourselves as publishers and at printers, and in terms of collaboration, as to I'm open to any ideas of what we can to. And I like your point just now about that strategic and collaborative approach, because we very much try and foster that with our vendors. But if there's anything that I'm missing or that can help to make an improvement across the industry, I think I'd like to hear it.
I think it's a matter of scale. It's a matter of a variety of factors. But the one thing I would say is that with the, how would I put it, the uncertainty in the supply chain right now, I think more likely than not, there will be publishers moving from nearshore or offshore relationships to onshore. And my suspicion is that will make the demand in the US peak. So I would encourage you to book your hotels now, so to speak, so that you've got the time.
Talk
just
to
in
your
case you need it,
suppliers, get them,
Right.
get your, yeah, fair enough.
right?
Well, David, you mentioned the trade-off in printing technology and inventory policy earlier. And it seems to me like one way to reduce cycle time quickly is to maintain that small buffer stock and then replenish that.
Right.
And then as the
It's
supply
that,
times
yeah,
lengthen,
that automated stock replenishment, right? Where you
Yeah.
have a certain amount of inventory that you want to have on hand at all times. When you breach that number, the printer automatically goes back to press. It's not an intensely administrative process, right? And I think that works well. I mean, I know we have a number of publishers who use that solution with us. And the interesting thing is that depending on the organization you are working with, your business model can have all three. You can have POD, you can have ASR, you can have core, right? But it's done at a title level, not at an organizational level.
And
yeah,
if I'm
based on,
sorry,
go
Ken,
ahead.
and if I may, and David mentioned, finding a primary, secondary, tertiary print supplier, I think publishers also need to look at that from a component basis. David mentioned that paper supplies are gonna ebb and flow as demand spikes, as private equity comes into play, and all of these things. And we saw it during the pandemic, right? When everybody's favorite paper for that particular title wasn't available, you had to pick a different one, right? And the book still shipped and it still sold and everybody was okay. It scared the crap out of most publishers, but it still happened. And I think it makes sense to have those secondary and tertiary paper stocks, cover stocks, all those things in mind for when, you know, if I need, something breaks down in my supply chain, I can still go to this printer. Now I know I'm not going to, they don't have this paper, but I can get my second favorite paper for this book and they can get it done in 3 days versus 5. Or do I wait 5 days and get the paper I want? And it's just it's a decision tree, right? Everybody's got to decide what is the most important part of that supply chain and what they're comfortable with. And am I willing to pay, you know, 25 cents more a book to get that time or get that paper or get that because it's one less day of shipping time because it's on the East Coast versus the West Coast, or 3 months less shipping time because it's in the United States versus Asia, and all of those things. So it's a big picture.
I think my point was more about trying to shift the needle of service in the industry from 5 days as POD down lower, which is more in line with what an Amazon Prime could do. And we're trying to compete with that.
Oh, sure. And I was talking bigger picture, not just your specific situation.
No,
but just
I know that.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that, collaboratively, whatever we can do to make things more efficient, so that we can have the right stocks or the options, available, at the right times, so that we can ride the waves, as it were, is important.
Right,
And so I'm totally
Dave,
with you
I
on
think
what you were saying. Yeah.
I hope you would agree that one of the things about the Amazon model, right, is that it's really based on what I'll call the Henry Ford model. Anything you want
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
anything you want as long as it's black, right? That's what you get. But if you need, right, colored end papers or you need a special stock or something like that, it's a much more complicated supply chain with Amazon. So they do lots of things very well, but the higher end product, right, I don't think at the moment, at least, from my lips to God's ears, is their sweet spot.
No, I get it. I mean, they do hardbacks, but it's that. Yeah, but I get you on that. The sheet fed stuff. Fair enough.
I did like Matt's, this is a thought that I've been pushing standardization of paper grades and trim sizes and things for years and years. And it always gets a really strong pushback from editorial. But Matt's approach of having alternatives in mind so that when stuff does go out of stock, you have a fallback versus trying to negotiate it on the fly, I think is a really good point. And more likely to gain acceptance when the choice is, well, you might not get your books otherwise. Good points. All right, we're right at the end of time here. Any other last questions? We have time for maybe one more.
Just want to point out that Jill posted a question in the chat.
Jill, why don't you come off mute and ask the question while I try to read it here.
I'm here, Ken. Thank you. One of the things that strikes me as being a very real risk in the current environment is we keep hearing about how print runs are being reduced over and over. The size of a print run is getting smaller. There's becoming much more in the realm of short runs. But my concern is how low can print runs go and still remain viable and affordable in terms of allowing printing houses themselves to remain, in business. I have concerns in part because there was an instance of the bishop who spoke at one of the inauguration ceremonies. She got great response. Her book, when I went to Amazon to buy it, her book was available in Kindle edition only. They said they were temporarily out of stock in terms of the print version. Now you've got a situation there where that product was clearly in a position to increase its sales by significant percentages. The book has only just been added back into inventory for purchase. My question is, how should publishers be thinking about that juggling act between having the right sized print run and running that risk of not having it be in stock when you need it?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a just in case option here, and I will regret saying this, but one of the things that lots of publishers do is that they have the product with multiple sources. So they will have the product with an offset vendor. They'll also have the product with a digital vendor. So if they need to go back and top it off, they can get a quick digital print run, or they will have it with Amazon. Right. So I think that so you can conceivably do all three. You can have it with an offset vendor, you can have it with a digital vendor, you can have it with Ingram, you can have it with Amazon, and whoever gets the order gets the chance to fulfill it. So I think that's one of the ways to hedge your bet. The issue is how broadly you do that. I think that that's something you do with selective products, not with every product in your portfolio.
Yeah, you're right. You need a portfolio of inventory and technology strategies so that when you've got these cases, you can roll right through them and one of them is going to come through for you. Really good point. Okay, David, thank you so much for that really thoughtful presentation and the conversation afterwards. I also really appreciated everybody jumping in with questions. Very nicely done.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. And again, if you're going to be at PubWest or IBPA or London Book Fair, we'd love to connect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Bye,
David.
everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ken, for moderating.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.